Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Claire Palmer. I'm going to kick off. I am at 5 Essex Court, which is a leading police law set based in the Temple, just around the corner from here. A bit of brief background, my journey to the bar. I studied law at Bristol. I did my BPTC, called the BVC then, at BPP. That's quite a lot of acronyms in the first line. I did my pupillage at Littleton Chambers, which is a commercial and employment set. I was a terrible pupil, and I moved to be a junior tenant at Thomas More Chambers straight after pupillage. I spent about 10 years there doing what was very much an entirely common law practice, including crime. I did crime for sort of 4 or 5 years, and then 2 years ago I was approached by 5 Essex Court, and I joined them and have become part of the Treasury team. I'm on the government panel, I'm on the B panel, and I've done government work for the last 7 years, and so I now work for both the government and for the police, but as an independent practitioner in Chambers. So one of the questions we were asked to answer was sort of why choose this practice area. I think it'd be fair to say that for me it chose me. One of the things about applying for pupillage is you've got the tricky balancing exercise of having your interests but actually desperately wanting pupillage, frankly, anywhere. And what you have to get across is your particular areas of interest, but also showing that you're happy to have a wider range of work as well. And the really nice thing about the common law bar and sets that do common law is that you can switch that around a little bit. You can say what I really like about your set is that you've got a really broad practice, and the 1 or 2 areas that really interest me at the moment are X and Y. So what is the common law? I thought it might just be worth setting that out at the start. Hopefully all of you know, I won't put any of you on the spot. But essentially it's the part of English law that is derived from custom and judicial precedent rather than from statutes. So it covers a very broad range of work. So although we're a police law set and we largely have police clients, we do a lot of the common law. So that's typically claims involving tort or contract, but it can also be any other area of law where the case law develops that particular field of law. What sort of work do I do? Well, let me tell you a little bit about my January, which was pretty busy. I did an employment claim, which was a whistleblowing claim for a government department, a number of salacious sexual allegations. We had a couple of preliminary hearings, and we settled it, ultimately a judicial mediation, saving you, the taxpayer, 14 days worth of hearing. I did a settlement agreement against a large bank for an employee. I did a claim for the Crown Prosecution Service, where both the CPS and the police were being sued for malicious prosecution, misfeasance in public office, and after the judge's intervention at the first hearing, claims of the tort of conspiracy, which nobody in Chambers had done anything on for some time, but we now have 4 of us or 3 of us in Chambers that know quite a lot more about that. A claim for breach of Article 5, premised on a decision called Zanatti, which is where if there's not reasonable suspicion and someone is kept in custody, you can now bring an Article 5 claim against the police and the CPS. I also appeared in the Special Immigration Appeals Commission, dealing with naturalisation cases. And finally, I also undertake some work in the sovereign base area in Cyprus. It was my only really good gig. Woking and other places don't quite come up to there. And I was drafting some grounds of response for Privy Council, all related to the Privy Council, all relating to 1 day's pay, which is a penalty that a police officer in the sovereign base area had imposed, and he's really unhappy about it. So pretty broad January, and that's just 1 month. So what do I find appealing about this area of practice? Well, the broad variety, the fact that no 2 days are ever really the same, as well as doing the work that I've explained. I could also be doing an inquest, a week, 2 week, 3 week inquests. A lot of my work, as I've said, is for the government and the police. And so what that means is that I get a good feel for my clients. Working for those large organisations, they have particular needs. They can be frustrating at times. There's definitely no shortage of work because everybody sues the government and the police, and it's one of the areas where legal aid is still given for people to bring claims against those institutions. So we're definitely very busy, which means a good income, and I can help the London economy by going to lovely bars and restaurants as a consequence of that when I'm allowed out. I really like the fact that you're using core general principles. You get a case and you're not just looking at the statute and working out what the statute means. You're researching case law, you're going back to first principles, you're thinking about how you can have a creative argument, because I do the defendant side quite a lot, normally responding to novel arguments that the claimant side are trying to run. And there's substantial amounts of advocacy. Certainly at the more junior end, you'll be in court nearly every day. As you get more senior, it varies. Obviously, big trials can tend to collapse, and you can, but you still are in court quite a lot. But also opportunities to be led. When they're big cases with big implications for big clients, they quite often want QCs or 2 barristers, or sometimes even more than that, a team of barristers working on a case. And so you get to work with other people and to learn from them, both what you would do and also sometimes what you wouldn't do. That's never from people in my chambers. What are the lifestyle implications? I consulted Google about this as well, and I had this lovely phrase that someone has written down. What you need for this is confidence, flexibility, and an all-zone Oyster card. I'd say for my area, we go a lot further than London. There are 43 police forces, and we represent most of them. So our junior tenants can be, our most junior tenant was in Exeter one day, Shrewsbury the next. So he was travelling up that afternoon because he couldn't have actually physically got there if he'd have gone in the morning. But last week he was in London every day. So you do need to have the ability to travel, and it can be quite short notice, and you don't have a huge amount of, you need the flexibility in your personal life to be able to deal with that. There's a high turnover of work, but it's a good mix of advocacy and paperwork. So there will be times that you're in chambers. Now that I've been at the bar for a while, I think it's harder in your first couple of years, but I will go to lunchtime classes at the gym or go and see a personal trainer, and you've got the ability to go and do that if you're in court. I've started taking up running because if you're out of London, you need to be able to go and do that when you can't go to the gym. But ultimately, your lifestyle opportunity will depend on your chambers and the approach that your pupil supervisor and other members of chambers take, and more importantly, your senior clerk. One of the questions you might want to ask of barristers is, what does your senior clerk think of the word holiday? It will give you a pretty good indication as to lifestyle. So finally, what key skills and personal qualities are needed? Coming back to that, there's got to be an intellectual ability, the ability to be flexible, the ability to be responsive, to be creative, of course, within ethical limits, to be tactical and practical, and the ability to assimilate large volumes of information, quite a number of different cases of significant amounts of facts and law, sometimes at short notice. You need to be able to communicate in layman's terms to your clients, and you need to be able to instill confidence in your clients, because you may only be meeting them for the first time at court or 2 or 3 days before the hearing, and you need to be able to get on board and to be a normal person. I think actually the common law, for those of you that have a broad ability to interact with different people in different areas and like that flexibility, then perhaps that's the area for you. I'll now hand over to Anton.
Hi, my name's Anton van Dellen. I'm a barrister in practice at Goldsmith Chambers in the Temple. Much like my colleague to my right, I didn't do pupillage in the set which I'm currently at. I did pupillage in a branch, a very niche branch of Chancery law. And at the end of that, pretty much worked out that what I wanted was to represent people rather than corporations. So unlike common law defendant work, where police forces or the government are being represented, I do claimant common law work. So I generally represent people taking actions against the NHS or against the police or against the prison service. So that's what I like about it. I like representing individual clients in what we probably unfairly characterize as David and Goliath. The type of cases, you'll hear a reprise of a complete mixture, and that's what I find really refreshing, is you get exposed to the full panoply of law. Just to give you an example, obviously I do actions against the police as they beat up my client and unlawfully detain them, and think up hopefully some of these novel legal arguments I'm very excited to hear. I'll be running fairly soon. Personal injury work. Lots of my clients are very badly injured with their workforce as part of a workforce. Most of my clients are expats who are not unionized and are not aware of health and safety legislation and work in very dangerous ways. I deal a lot with cash seizure and vodka seizure and tobacco seizure. And I find that really interesting because it's in a criminal court but using civil law. And there's some arguments we've been running recently about cost recovery in that. And we had a case stated in front of Sir Brian Levison where he pointed out even though we'd won our case, we couldn't recover our costs against Border Force. And then finally, contract law, because there is so much contract law out there that if you're a half-decent common law lawyer, barrister, you will end up doing some contract law. I find that really interesting. I have a particular interest in freezing injunctions and was recently, repeatedly, as the judge at the final hearing pointed out, repeatedly back in front of the High Court asking for a freezing injunction in support of proceedings going on in Bangladesh. So you get a bit of a feel of the variety and the mixture, which I find really interesting. What's appealing? The money is quite nice when I see my poor criminal colleagues going off to do a mention at Southwark for £50 and they are 25 years call. Actually, my quick hearing to set aside a possession order actually doesn't look so bad after all. So I'm doing interesting work, but actually being reasonably remunerated for it. And I'm still representing individuals taking on big corporations, so it's not as though I'm necessarily entirely sold out every shred of what remained of my, admittedly, what started as fairly threadbare principles. It is also quite flexible as well, so I enjoy working quite flexibly. I enjoy waking up a little bit later if I just have drafting to do and then working into the evenings, and that's possible to do in the way that you can't necessarily do at the criminal bar where they want you in court bang on at 10 o'clock and you have to see your clients in the cells before that. Lifestyle implications. You have to just accept that your lifestyle will be severely disrupted and you will miss lots of birthday parties, lots of important functions, lots of holidays I've missed as well, because you're a really important client who's very vulnerable. You can't just hand their case off to someone else, so non-refundable holidays I've lost. Up late into the night making urgent applications by telephone to the High Court and the Court of Appeal, stopping my client being deported. You can't say, I'm sorry, I've got a really important dinner date at Gavroche, I'm really keen on keeping. Your client crashes straight through that. If that is really important to you, this is not for you. You need to go and do something else, and you need to work for a corporation or a regulator where you leave work regularly at 5 o'clock. I probably have not left chambers before 7:30 once in the last 6 months, reasonably, and that's just my personal choice because I prefer working late into the evenings, but I'm by no means the last one there when I leave in the evenings. It is a rough lifestyle choice, and you have to bite the bullet and just accept that. Finally, what key skills do you need? I'm under no illusion. My clients are not instructing me because I'm the brightest lawyer that there is at the English bar. They're fundamentally instructing me because they quite like me as a person and because they quite like the fact that even fairly hopeless cases, I'll roll up my sleeves and have a bash. After warning them, of course, that we're unlikely to win. But they just want to have their day in court. They just want to try and give the other side a bloody nose. You've heard the one-day pay. It's not about the one-day pay. It's about them saying, I want to have my day in court. I want to say what you're doing is fundamentally wrong. So that's one personal quality that you need to have. You need to get on with your solicitors and get on with fundamentally with your clients. And you also, at the very junior end of the bar, have to be quite internet savvy. So we do lots on the claimant side. We do lots of direct access work. We do lots of internet advertising. We have lots of discussions about search engine optimization and about ways in which our work comes from non-traditional routes via interpreters and community centers. The way we get our work is not a traditional kind of Clifford Chance ringing up saying we'd like to instruct you. That's not how work arrives on my desk. And in fact, I think for claimant common law work, you need to, this is 2016, you need to be aware of how the internet works and how advertising works and how work flows into your diary, especially on the direct access side. Off you go.
Hi everyone, my name's Charlotte Hadfield and I am in practice at Three Paper Buildings. That is a set in the Temple that has been around for something like 100 years. We're quite big as barrister sets go. There are around 170 of us practising out of 5 centres, obviously one in London, and then the others are in Bristol, Bournemouth, Winchester and Oxford. I decided to do a law degree because I couldn't really think of any other degree that I wanted to do, and I wanted a degree that worked towards something rather than a purely academic degree. I decided to be a barrister because I said to my personal tutor that I was vaguely thinking of becoming a solicitor, and he was a barrister and said he thought I should be a barrister instead. I say that when I actually came to the bar, I seemed to constantly meet people who said, oh, well, I used to watch Crown Court when I was a child and I've wanted to be a barrister since the age of 7, and I still feel a little bit self-conscious that I didn't want to do this job from the age of 7. It's a really interesting job. I started out doing crime. I was at Hardwick, which was a general common law set, and at the time had a civil group, a family group and a criminal group. I had a mixed pupillage taking in all 3 of those areas. I chose to specialise in crime. At some point, the criminal group broke off and became 15 New Bridge Street. I left 15 New Bridge Street in 2007 and moved to Three Paper Buildings, where I now do education and employment work. So the reason that I chose those areas is actually because they are pretty broad. They're a very good example of common law in action, really. Education is a mixture of public law, judicial review, there are some statutory torts in there, and there's good old breach of contract and negligence, and education disputes are resolved using a sort of combination of those. And employment, again, is a mixture of statutory torts, like the tort of unfair dismissal, and the common law. In terms of cases that I've dealt with, sometimes I represent schools who want to bring a breach of contract claim against perhaps a local authority or even maybe against another school. Sometimes I represent parents who are in dispute with their school, and that might be over provision for special educational needs, or it might just be a dispute over fees if they have their children at an independent school. I've dealt with disputes between parents and schools where the relationship between them has broken down, and the school may, for example, have sought to ban the parent from the site, which is something that can happen. I've dealt with employment claims where I have tended to represent the employer, the school, against the claimant, but not always. And I've also dealt with nurseries that are facing strike-off by Ofsted, people who are facing being barred from working with children. It's a very broad church, and there's lots of really interesting, varied work there. There are some themes that run through both of those areas. So, for example, if you like discrimination work, then discrimination comes up in both employment and education on a fairly regular basis. And if you're interested in things like the safeguarding of vulnerable adults and children, that's something that has principles in common both in education and in employment cases and in regulatory cases about care homes and so on. So it's a very broad church. I really enjoy it. It keeps me on my toes. You have to be able to keep an awful lot of balls in the air when you're advising on these cases, because it's not necessarily a case of, well, this is a breach of contract claim. There are often a number of different claims that you can bring, and you have to be aware of all of those claims, so you have to do a lot of keeping up with the law, and you have to be able to advise clients about what's likely to be tactically the best way forward. So there's an awful lot to think about. In terms of lifestyle implications, It's difficult to separate them off from the rest of the bar, really. I mean, the bar is, I'm sure you all know by now, because everybody starts warning you the moment you express an interest in a career at the bar, that you're not going to have any kind of social life, and that you're going to have extremely erratic hours. It's true that you'll have erratic hours. Most of us manage to wedge a social life in there somehow. But I agree, certainly, that for the first 10 years or so, there's an awful lot of missed appointments, missed birthday parties, letting down of family members, people who don't really understand why you phone someone at 6:30 and say, I can't go to the cinema with you in half an hour's time. You know, some people understand that, some people don't. There is some emergency work involved. I've had to apply for injunctions, for example, and that's not something you can put off. You pretty much have to drop what you're doing and do it. It's difficult to take an uninterrupted holiday. My best tactic for that, by the way, is that I now book off twice as long as I want, and I spend the first quarter of the time finishing off the cases that I haven't been able to finish before the beginning of the holiday. Then I have my holiday, where hopefully I'll just be checking my emails once or twice a day and not having to do anything. And then I'll spend the last quarter gearing up for whatever work I'm going to do when I come back. But I agree that you need to get a feel for how the sets you're hoping to join look at holidays, because some sets will pressurise you to take as little holiday as possible. At 3PB, we believe in a work-life balance, and so you don't get... We encourage our pupils to take holiday, and members are not normally pressurised not to. The pressure really comes from within, because we all know what our cases demand. So I don't go anywhere where I know I'm not going to get any reception. I have to be somewhere where I can check my emails every couple of days. And sometimes I have to do some work on my holidays, and my family has just come to accept that there will always be a point where I dash off into a corner and start giving advice over the phone. But overall, it's incredibly rewarding. And for the thing that you really need to watch for, I think, is that for the first 5 years that you practice, whatever area you're in, it feels like this amazing hobby that somehow people pay you for. And it's only as you sort of get into your, sort of 10 years of practice or so that you start to remember that actually there are other things you might like to do around it. But overall, it's a really rewarding area of law, I think.